I remember the exact moment the word weak first felt like a physical blow. It wasn't shouted in anger, not at first. It was a soft, dismissive sigh from my mother, a quiet judgment whispered just loud enough for me to hear. Buried under layers of false concern and thinly veiled disappointment, I was 20-something, fresh out of business school, brimming with ambition, and had just landed my first real job in financial consulting, a path I'd chosen precisely because I craved independence, a way to build something entirely my own, but in my family. Independence was a dirty word, often mistaken for selfishness, and my ambition was seen as a personal affront to their unspoken rules. "Oh, Sarah," Mom would say, her voice dripping with pity. "You're so sensitive. You take things so personally. You need to be stronger if you want to make it in this world." And there it was. Stronger. Always stronger. But what they meant was more pliable, more amenable to our demands, less likely to challenge the status quo. My entire life, I'd been the quiet one, the diligent one, the one who tried to keep the peace. My older brother, Michael, was the golden child. Charming and effortlessly successful, or so it seemed on the surface. My younger sister, Emily, was the free spirit, always chasing some new artistic endeavor, constantly needing support which usually translated to financial bailouts. And then there was me, the pragmatic middle child, the one who could crunch numbers, manage budgets, and somehow, always, seemed to be the default problem solver, especially when those problems involved money. They never quite understood my career, my world of investments, risk assessments, and market analyses. To them, it was just Sarah's fancy job that makes a lot of money. And that money was something they felt intrinsically entitled to, not because they were in dire need. Mind you, my parents had a comfortable pension, a fully paid-off house in the suburbs. Michael was doing fine in his law firm. And Emily, well, Emily was Emily. But there was always something, always a leaky roof for Mom and Dad, a great investment opportunity for Michael, or Emily's latest art project needing seed money. I can trace it back to my childhood, really. Dinner table conversations weren't about our day, our dreams, or our struggles. They were about appearances, about what the neighbors thought, about who was achieving what according to some invisible scorecard only my mother held. My achievements, like acing a difficult math test or winning a school debate, were met with a perfunctory nod, quickly overshadowed by Michael's latest sports trophy or Emily's charming artistic quirks. I remember once, I got a scholarship for a summer science program, something I was incredibly proud of. My father, usually distant, even offered a rare smile, but my mother, she just looked at me, a slight frown on her face, and said, "That's nice, dear, but you know, a pretty girl like you doesn't need to be so smart. You'll scare away the boys." Weak. It was the underlying current of every interaction. If I voiced a different opinion, I was too emotional. If I stood firm on a decision, I was stubborn and unyielding. If I chose to spend my hard-earned money on myself, a new car, a vacation, even just a nice piece of furniture for my apartment, I was frivolous or selfish. My financial success, which should have been a source of pride, was instead viewed as a communal pot, an endless well from which everyone could draw. "Sarah, darling," my mother would purr over the phone, her voice syrupy sweet. "Your father's old car is just on its last legs. You know how much he hates asking, but could you perhaps help out with a down payment for a new one? Just a small loan, of course. A small loan that was never repaid. A small loan that was always followed by another, and another, and another. It started subtly. A few $100s here for a medical emergency. That turned out to be a new set of golf clubs for my dad. A couple of $1,000 there for Michael's urgent business investment, which never materialized into anything but a new designer watch. For Emily, it was always rent, art supplies, or some obscure workshop in Bali she just had to attend for her creative growth. And I, foolishly, generously, always said yes. Why? Because that's what good family members do. Right? You support each other, you help each other out, and deep down, I yearned for their approval. For that elusive pat on the back that said, "You did good, Sarah. We appreciate you. But that appreciation never came. Instead, my generosity was met with more demands, more expectations. The more I gave, the less they respected my boundaries. Because I had no boundaries, I was an open door, a bottomless ATM, a fixer of all problems, and a silent observer of my own slow depletion. The real turning point, the one that truly jolted me awake, came last Thanksgiving. We were all at my parents' house, the usual uncomfortable gathering filled with forced smiles and underlying tension. I had just announced my plans to take a sabbatical, a dream trip to Southeast Asia I'd been planning and saving for years. I had worked tirelessly, doubled my savings, and finally felt ready to disconnect, recharge, and explore. A sabbatical, whoa, my mother scoffed, her perfectly manicured hand waving dismissively. What for, you're not that old, Sarah? Besides, who's going to help us out with the house payments if you're off gallivanting across the world? Your father's pension isn't what it used to be. You know, my father, who is perfectly capable of managing their finances, simply nodded along. Michael chimed in. Yeah, Sarah, you always were a bit dramatic. A trip like that is just excessive. Think about the family. We need you here. And Emily, bless her heart. But she piled on too. Oh, Sarah, I was actually going to ask you about helping me fund my new ceramic studio. It's a huge upfront cost. But it's going to be amazing, surely. That's more important than some exotic vacation. The words hit me like a barrage of small, sharp stones. House payments. They had a fully paid-off house. Excessive after years of working 60-hour weeks. More important than some exotic vacation. My dream, my hard-earned respite, reduced to a frivolous indulgence. But it was my mother's next line that truly snapped something inside me. As I tried to articulate that this trip was important for my well-being, that I had earned it, that my financial independence was precisely for moments like this, she looked at me with those cold, pitying eyes. Oh, Sarah, she sighed again, her voice laced with a saccharine sweetness that made my teeth ache. You're always so focused on yourself. It's a bit weak, darling. To need to run away from your responsibilities. A truly strong person would understand the importance of family, of putting others first. Weak. There it was. Again. The word they used to justify their control, their demands, their endless taking. It was the weapon they wielded to make me feel small, selfish, and unworthy of my own desires. My hands clenched under the table, my nails digging into my palms. I felt a hot flush creep up my neck, but this time, it wasn't shame. It was a simmering, unfamiliar anger. For years, I'd internalized that word. I'd believed it. I'd seen my inability to say no, my constant need for their approval, my silent resentment, as proof of my inherent weakness. I was weak, wasn't I? Why else would I let them walk all over me? Why else would I constantly sacrifice my own well-being for theirs, only to be met with more scorn? But sitting there, listening to them dismantle my dream, dismiss my hard work, and label my self-care as weakness, something shifted. A tiny, defiant spark ignited within me. It wasn't weakness that made me want to build a life of my own. It wasn't weakness to desire peace, boundaries, and respect. And it certainly wasn't weakness to finally begin to question the narrative they had imposed on me for decades. That night, I went home, not to my usual spiral of self-pity, but to a quiet, burning resolve. I looked at my meticulously planned itinerary for Southeast Asia, the brochures, the notes, the saved articles, each page, each picture of ancient temples and vibrant markets. Felt like a silent protest. They called me weak for standing up for myself. Fine, let them. Because I was about to show them what real strength looked through the consequences of my newfound boundaries. This wasn't just about a trip anymore. This was about reclaiming myself. And hey, if you've ever felt like your family's expectations are a weight crushing you, if you've ever been called selfish or weak for simply trying to live your own life, then hit that like button and subscribe. Because trust me, you won't believe what happened next. And maybe, just maybe, my story can help you find your own strength too. The afterglow of Thanksgiving faded, but the bitter taste of my family's words lingered, a constant, unpleasant residue. Their dismissiveness wasn't new, but the blatant disregard for my personal aspirations, coupled with the immediate financial demands, felt like a deliberate act of invalidation. It was as if my entire identity as an independent, capable woman was a direct threat to their carefully constructed family dynamic. And in that dynamic, I was assigned a role, the ever-reliable, endlessly giving, and ultimately invisible support system. The request started almost immediately after the holiday, escalating in frequency and brazenness. The leaky roof at my parents' house somehow transformed into a dire need for a full-scale kitchen renovation because, according to my mother, "Sarah, darling, your father and I deserve a beautiful space to enjoy our golden years, and frankly, your old room looks so much better with that new backsplash." My old room, the one I hadn't slept in for 25 years. The audacity was breathtaking. Then came Michael. He called, not to apologize for his Thanksgiving comments, but to casually mention a once-in-a-lifetime investment opportunity in some vague tech startup. "It's a sure thing, Sarah," he'd insisted, his voice oozing with his usual slick charm. "Just need a small bridge loan, to get in on the ground floor. 50,000 should do it. You're swimming in money. What's a little bit to you? $50,000. Just a little bit." My stomach clenched. That was a significant chunk of my sabbatical fund. The very trip they had just dismissed as weak and selfish. Emily, of course, wasn't far behind. Her ceramic studio idea had apparently morphed into a grand vision for an art collective and wellness retreat in a trendy, expensive part of town. "Sarah, you're so good with numbers," she'd chirped, her voice light and airy. "Could you just look over my business plan and maybe front me the first 6 months' rent? It's a huge investment, but think of the impact." Her impact always seemed to involve me footing the bill. Each call, each text, each casual mention during our weekly family dinners became a battlefield. I tried, feebly at first, to set boundaries. "Mom, Dad, I really don't think a full kitchen renovation is necessary right now. The roof was the priority. Remember." "Oh, Sarah, don't be so dramatic," my mother would sigh, her voice laced with disappointment. "It's just a few cabinets. You make it sound like we're asking for the moon. We raised you, We sacrificed so much. Is this how you repay us?" The familiar guilt trip, delivered with surgical precision. With Michael, it was slightly different. He'd use a mix of charm and subtle intimidation. "Look, Sarah, I know you're good with money. You're practically a financial wizard. So why are you being so tight-fisted with your own brother? Are you saying you don't trust my judgment? Are you saying you don't care about my success?" He'd twist my prudence into a personal failing, my caution into a lack of family loyalty. And Emily. She'd just dissolve into tears. "I thought you supported my art. Sarah, everyone else thinks I'm brilliant. You're the only one who doesn't believe in me." Her emotional blackmail was almost childish in its transparency, yet it still pricked at the deep-seated desire within me to be seen as supportive and kind. These interactions chipped away at me, piece by agonizing piece. I'd spend hours after each call replaying the conversations, scrutinizing every word, searching for where I went wrong. Why couldn't I just say a firm no? Why did their disapproval sting so much I found myself physically tensing up whenever my phone rang, dreading the next incoming request, the next subtle jab at my character? My home, which had once been my sanctuary, began to feel like a temporary safe house, a place where I could hide from the onslaught of familial demands. My work, which I loved, started to feel tainted. How could I advise clients on financial planning and healthy boundaries when my own life was a chaotic mess of blurred lines and emotional debt? One evening, after a particularly draining phone call with my mother, where she'd managed to imply that my desire for a sabbatical was akin to abandoning them in their old age, I found myself staring at my reflection in the bathroom mirror. My eyes were shadowed, my shoulders hunched. I looked tired, defeated. This wasn't the strong, confident financial consultant I presented to the world. This was Sarah, the perpetual victim of her family's emotional and financial manipulation. "Why," I whispered to my reflection, The word a raw, painful exhalation. Why do I let them do this? The answer, agonizingly, slowly, began to surface from the depths of my memory. It wasn't just about money, it was about control, from a young age. My family had perfected the art of subtle invalidation. My opinions were rarely sought. My achievements minimally celebrated. When I showed initiative, it was often met with a quiet critique that undermined my confidence. That's nice, but have you thought about? Or, are you sure that's the best way Michael would probably? This constant conditioning had taught me that my worth was tied to my utility to them, not to my intrinsic value. If I was useful, if I was compliant, if I helped solve their problems, especially financial ones, then maybe, just maybe, I would earn their love, their approval, their recognition. The idea of saying no, of putting myself first, felt like an act of profound selfishness, a betrayal of the unwritten family contract. And the word weak was their ultimate weapon if I didn't comply, if I showed any form of resistance. I was branded weak, not just weak, but morally weak, unable to handle the responsibilities of family, unable to truly understand what love meant. It was a brilliant, insidious tactic. By labeling my nascent attempts at self-preservation as weakness, they ensured I stayed trapped in a cycle of giving, hoping to prove them wrong, hoping to finally earn their respect. But Thanksgiving had cracked something open. That primal anger I felt, that hot flush of defiance, had left a residue too. It was a small, fragile seedling of self-respect that was slowly, painstakingly, pushing through the hard, cracked earth of my ingrained obedience. I started doing things differently, in small, almost imperceptible ways. When my mother called to complain about the cost of a new garden gnome she had to have, instead of offering to pay, I simply said, "Oh, that's a shame. Garden gnomes can be quite expensive, can't they? No offer, no solution, just a neutral observation." The silence on the other end was deafening. When Michael texted about his investment opportunity, I replied, "Sounds interesting. Have you fully vetted the risks? What's the projected ROI over 5 years? Send me the prospectus when you get a chance." It was a professional response, not a personal one. It put the onus back on him to do the work, to prove his case. Instead of me just handing over money, he never sent the prospectus. Emily was harder. Her emotional pleas always hit closer to home. When she talked about her art collective, I listened patiently, then said, "That sounds like a wonderful vision. Have you looked into government grants for artists, or perhaps crowdfunding? There are many resources out there for creative entrepreneurs." I didn't offer a penny. Only advice she almost certainly didn't want. She quickly changed the subject. Each small step was terrifying. My heart pounded. My palms sweat. I waited for the explosion, the furious backlash. It didn't come immediately, not in the dramatic way I expected. Instead, there was a subtle shift in their tone, a hint of annoyance, a flicker of confusion. They weren't used to me not immediately jumping to their aid. They were testing the waters, pushing the boundaries, trying to see if this new, slightly less amenable Sarah was just a temporary glitch. The tension in the air became almost palpable, especially during our Sunday dinners. The conversations felt stilted, punctuated by uncomfortable silences. My mother would eye me across the table, her gaze sharp, probing, as if trying to dissect the change in me. My father remained stoic, but I could sense his unease. Michael would make sarcastic comments about my newfound independence, and Emily would retreat into her phone, sulking. The guilt, a lifelong companion, tried to reassert its grip. Am I being selfish? Am I abandoning my family? Am I really just weak, trying to escape my responsibilities? The old narrative whispered in my ear, trying to pull me back into the familiar pattern of self-sacrifice. But something else was happening too. With each small boundary I held, however awkwardly, a tiny ripple of peace spread through me. It was a subtle, almost imperceptible shift. But it was there. The dread before phone calls lessened. The tightness in my chest eased. I started breathing a little deeper. This wasn't weakness. This was the first, trembling breath of strength. It was messy. It was terrifying. and I still felt incredibly vulnerable. But for the first time in my life, I was putting my own oxygen mask on first. And that, I was beginning to realize, was the strongest thing I could do. I was ready for the next step, ready to seek out external validation that what I was doing was not only okay, but necessary. I knew I couldn't do this alone. I needed a mirror, a witness, someone who could confirm that I wasn't crazy, that their manipulation was real, and that my desire for autonomy wasn't selfish, but healthy. The quiet defiance I'd been practicing, the subtle shifts in my responses, had only served to heighten the tension within the family. It was like a pressure cooker, simmering on low, threatening to explode. And the person who felt that pressure most acutely was me. The constant anxiety, the relentless internal debate, am I doing the right thing, am I being selfish, was exhausting. I was treading water in an emotional ocean, and I desperately needed a lifeline. That lifeline came in the form of Clara. Clara wasn't just a friend. She was my rock, my sounding board, and arguably, the only person in my life who saw me, truly saw Sarah, beyond the expectations and the labels. We'd met years ago through a professional networking group, both navigating the male-dominated world of finance, and quickly bonded over late-night work sessions and shared frustrations. She was a no-nonsense, fiercely intelligent woman with a razor-sharp wit and a heart of gold. If anyone could help me untangle the Gordian knot of my family dynamics, it was Clara. I remember the day I finally broke down. It was a Tuesday evening, after an especially brutal phone call with my mother, where she'd managed to imply that my desire for a private financial audit, a suggestion I'd made to help them manage their own pension, which they immediately twisted into an accusation of me meddling, was a personal attack on their competence and a sign of my growing distrust. The call ended with her saying, in a voice dripping with feigned hurt, "I just don't understand why you're being so difficult. Sarah, it's almost like you don't care about us anymore. It's truly heartbreaking to see my strong daughter become so cold, difficult." The words echoed in my head, joining weak and selfish. I hung up the phone, my hand shaking, and slumped onto my couch. The tears came, hot and furious, a torrent of pent-up frustration, anger, and grief for the family I wished I had. My phone rang again. It was Clara. I almost didn't answer, but something in me, some deep instinct, knew I needed her. "Hey, you all right?" Clara's voice was calm, perceptive. She knew me too well. "You sound off." Through choked sobs, I blurted out everything: the kitchen renovation demands, Michael's investment, Emily's art collective, the Thanksgiving incident, the constant labeling, the pervasive guilt. I laid bare my deepest insecurities, my fear of being truly alone if I pushed them away, my lifelong struggle for their approval. I even admitted, shamefully, that a part of me still believed their accusations, that maybe I was weak for feeling so overwhelmed. Clara listened patiently, silently, letting me empty out all the toxic emotional sludge that had accumulated over decades. When I finally ran out of words, only ragged breaths left, she spoke. "Sarah," she said, her voice soft but firm, "you are not weak. You are being manipulated, and you are being gaslit." The word hit me with the force of a revelation. Gaslighting. I'd heard it before, read about it in articles, seen it discussed online, but I'd never truly applied it to my own life, to my own family. It was always something other people dealt with, in toxic relationships, never my family. But as Clara explained it, detailing how my mother twisted my words, denied my reality, and made me question my own sanity, it was like 1,000 puzzle pieces suddenly clicked into place. "Think about it, Sarah," Clara continued, her voice gentle, encouraging. "You're a top-tier financial consultant. You manage multi-million-dollar portfolios. You stand up to intimidating clients. You negotiate complex deals. You make tough decisions under pressure. You are one of the strongest, most competent women I know. Does any of that sound weak to you? But with them, I just crumble." I admitted, my voice barely a whisper. "I feel like a child again, trying desperately to please, trying to avoid their disapproval." "Exactly," Clara said, "because they've conditioned you. They've trained you to believe that your worth is tied to their happiness, and their happiness is tied to your compliance. They exploit your empathy, your sense of family duty, and when you try to assert yourself, even in the smallest way, they hit you with, "You're selfish. You're cold. You're weak." It's a control mechanism, Sarah, not a reflection of who you actually are. Her words were a balm to my raw nerves, but also a sharp awakening. It wasn't just the money, it was the insidious psychological game they had been playing my entire life. They didn't want a strong, independent daughter. They wanted a controllable resource. My professional success, far from being a source of pride for them, was simply a larger well for them to draw from. And my desire for my own life, my own dreams, was perceived as a direct threat to their supply. "So, what do?" I asked, desperation creeping back into my voice. "How do I stop it? How do I even begin to untangle all of this?" Clara was pragmatic. "First, you need to acknowledge that this isn't your fault. You're not weak for being caught in this. You're strong for even realizing it and wanting to change. Second, you need to grieve the family you wish you had. It's okay to be sad that they aren't the supportive, loving unit you deserve. And third, you need to start putting up impenetrable boundaries, not weak ones that they can just step over. Real boundaries, the kind that protect you." She then shared some resources books on narcissistic family dynamics, articles on setting boundaries with difficult family members, even a recommendation for a therapist specializing in family systems. "I'm not saying they're all narcissists, Sarah," she clarified, "but the dynamic is similar. It's about control and lack of empathy for your needs. And a therapist can give you the tools and the emotional support to navigate this." That conversation with Clara was the pivot point. It was the moment the vague, unsettling feeling I'd had for years finally coalesced into a clear, undeniable truth. I wasn't imagining things. I wasn't overly sensitive. My feelings were valid. Their behavior was abusive, even if it wasn't physical. And most importantly, I had the right, no, the responsibility to protect myself. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of self-discovery and difficult introspection. I devoured the books Clara recommended, highlighting passages that felt like they were written specifically about my family. The descriptions of emotional manipulation, financial exploitation. The flying monkeys family members who act as enforcers for the dominant personality and the constant invalidation resonated deeply. Each new insight was painful, like peeling back a scab to reveal a festering wound. But it was also liberating. I started therapy. Dr. Evans was a calm, compassionate woman who listened without judgment. In our sessions, I recounted years of suppressed memories, the times my mother would forget to give me my allowance but never Michael's. The way my father would subtly pit me against my siblings, praising one's achievement while subtly disparaging another's. The constant comparisons. The unspoken rules that dictated I always had to be the responsible one. Dr. Evans helped me see the pattern from a very young age. I had been conditioned to seek external validation, specifically from my family. Their withholding of praise, coupled with their immediate need for my help, especially financial, created a loop. I'd try to earn their love by giving, by fixing, by sacrificing. When I did, I'd get a brief reprieve, a moment of being good before the cycle started again. Escalating with each successful rescue, my desire for my sabbatical, for my own life, was perceived by them not as a personal goal, but as a threat to their established order, to them. My strength was only valuable if it served their needs. My self-assertion was seen as a betrayal, hence the weak label. "Sarah," Dr. Evans explained gently, "their definition of weak is simply anyone who doesn't do what we want, and their definition of strong is anyone who complies with our demands. You were never weak. You were just operating under their distorted rulebook. It's time to write your own." The therapy sessions were tough. There were tears, anger, and moments of profound sadness. But there was also a growing sense of empowerment. I started to understand that my inability to say no wasn't weakness. It was a deeply ingrained coping mechanism developed in childhood. Now, as an adult, I had the power to change it. I practiced saying no. First, in my head, then, to small, inconsequential requests from strangers, then, to less important requests from friends. Each no felt like a muscle slowly, painfully stretching. It was uncomfortable, but also exhilarating. The sky didn't fall, people didn't hate me, and with each successful boundary, a little more self-trust bloomed. I also revisited my professional accomplishments. I looked at the complex financial models I'd built, the challenging negotiations I'd led, the difficult conversations I'd had with clients who were resistant to change. I had always approached my work with a quiet confidence, trusting my knowledge and my instincts. Why couldn't I apply that same confidence to my personal life, to my family? The disparity was jarring. In the boardroom, I was Sarah, the strategic, unshakable consultant. At home, I was Sarah, the timid, guilt-ridden daughter. The realization that I possessed this inner strength, this resilience, this capability, and had simply compartmentalized it away from my family, was a profound one. It wasn't that I lacked strength. It was that I had been taught to suppress it in the presence of my family. The anger, once a simmering resentment, began to solidify into a cold, clear resolve. I wasn't just angry at them for what they had done. I was angry at myself for allowing it for so long. But that anger was quickly replaced by a sense of fierce self-protection. I would not allow them to diminish me any longer. I would not allow them to label me weak for daring to exist outside their narrative. My sabbatical, once a distant dream, now became a symbol, a beacon. It wasn't just a trip. It was my declaration of independence. It was proof that my life, my money, and my choices belonged to me. The more they fought it, the more determined I became to make it happen. It was no longer just about exploring Southeast Asia. It was about exploring who Sarah truly was, unbound by their expectations. I started making concrete plans. I consulted with a real estate lawyer, quietly reviewing my property deeds and any joint accounts. I had mercifully few, but a few small ones existed. I looked into legal protections for my assets. I was building my fortress, brick by painstaking brick, and with each brick laid, the whispering voice of doubt grew fainter, replaced by a growing hum of empowerment. I was no longer just reacting. I was planning. I was preparing. I was getting ready to face them, not as the weak girl they perceived, but as the strong, self-assured woman I knew I could be. The game was about to change. The realization that I wasn't weak, but rather caught in a sophisticated web of manipulation, was both terrifying and liberating. Clara's unwavering support and Dr. Evans's insightful guidance had armed me with knowledge. But knowledge without action is just potential. It was time to translate that potential into concrete steps, to build the fortress around myself that Dr. Evans had spoken of. This wasn't about revenge. It was about self-preservation. It was about taking back control of my narrative, my finances, and my life. The first, most crucial step was to gain a crystal-clear understanding of my financial exposure to my family. As a financial consultant, I prided myself on meticulous record-keeping, but when it came to family, my usual rigor had softened into willful ignorance. I had loosely tracked the loans and gifts, often just scribbling them in a notebook, hoping they'd magically disappear. Now, it was time for a forensic audit of my own generosity. I spent an entire weekend poring over bank statements, credit card bills, and old emails. The numbers were staggering, thousands upon thousands of dollars, dispersed over 2 decades, often with vague explanations and never with any expectation of repayment. There were the emergency repairs for my parents' house that consistently amounted to new appliances or cosmetic upgrades. There were Michael's failed ventures, which always seemed to coincide with his sudden acquisition of new, expensive hobbies, and Emily's artistic endeavors, the retreats, the workshops, the exorbitant material costs, each one leaving a gaping hole in my savings. I tallied it all up, category by category. The total made my stomach churn. It wasn't just the money, it was the sheer audacity of it. The quiet expectation that I would always provide, no questions asked. I felt a surge of cold fury, quickly followed by a wave of profound sadness for the younger me, who had so desperately craved their approval that she had become financially subservient. This detailed ledger wasn't just a record of transactions. It was a testament to years of emotional exploitation, With this concrete data in hand, my next step was to consult a lawyer specializing in estate planning and financial boundaries. This was a significant move, one that felt incredibly formal and almost confrontational. But Dr. Evans had stressed the importance of formalizing boundaries, especially when financial interests were involved. She called it creating legal armor. The lawyer, a sharp, empathetic woman named Ms. Davies, listened intently as I recounted my story. Occasionally nodding in understanding, I laid out the financial records, the vague promises of repayment, the increasing demands. It's classic financial elder abuse, Sarah, Miss Davies stated calmly after reviewing my documents, referring to the exploitation of my parents. And your siblings are complicit, if not direct beneficiaries of your parents' enabling behavior, while pursuing repayment for past loans might be legally complex given the informal nature and lack of documentation. We can certainly prevent future exploitation and protect your assets. Her words validated my deepest fears and solidified my resolve. This wasn't just me being sensitive. This was a recognized form of abuse. Ms. Davies helped me draft an updated will, ensuring that my assets would be distributed according to my wishes, not based on any perceived familial obligation. We discussed establishing a trust for any future inheritances, to protect them from potential future claims or manipulations. Crucially, she advised me to sever any joint accounts, even the seemingly innocuous ones, and to ensure my financial information was completely private. She also suggested sending a formal, legally worded letter to my parents and siblings, stating my intention to cease all financial support, citing my own retirement planning and personal financial stability as the reason. This letter, she explained, served as a clear, irrefutable boundary. It was designed to be polite but firm, leaving no room for misinterpretation or emotional appeals. This was the hardest part. The thought of sending that letter, of seeing their inevitable reaction, filled me with dread. It felt like burning a bridge, severing a tie that, however toxic, had defined a significant part of my life. But Miss Davies reminded me, Sarah, you're not burning a bridge, you're building a new one that leads to your own peace and financial independence. They're the ones who set the bridge on fire with their actions, not you. Beyond the legal and financial safeguards, I focused intensely on bolstering my mental and emotional resilience. Therapy became a non-negotiable part of my week. Dr. Evans continued to provide invaluable tools for navigating difficult conversations, managing guilt, and reinforcing my self-worth. We practiced role-playing scenarios, with me articulating my boundaries clearly and calmly, anticipating their emotional outbursts, and learning to disengage from their manipulative tactics. Remember, Sarah, Dr. Evans would say, their reaction is not your responsibility. Their feelings are their own. Your responsibility is to protect your peace and your well-being. When they call you weak, it's a projection. It's because they feel weak losing their control over you. I started incorporating mindfulness practices into my daily routine. Meditation, long walks in nature, even just 5 minutes of focused breathing, anything to ground myself and quiet the cacophony of fear and guilt that still tried to invade my thoughts. I started a journal, specifically for documenting my feelings, my progress, and any attempts my family made to cross my boundaries. This journal became a crucial tool, a tangible record that affirmed my reality when their gaslighting tried to distort it. Physical health also became a priority. I rejoined a gym, started swimming regularly. The physical exertion was a powerful release for the emotional stress. As my body grew stronger, I felt a parallel strengthening in my mind. There was a direct correlation the more I nurtured myself. Physically and mentally, the less power their words held over me. One particularly challenging exercise Dr. Evans gave me was to write a letter of gratitude to my family, but not for them to read. It was purely for me. I had to list all the times I felt grateful for their influence, even the painful ones. This seemed counterintuitive, but Dr. Evans explained it was about acknowledging their role without letting it define me, and about forgiving myself for allowing the situation to persist. It was surprisingly cathartic. I wrote about the lessons learned, the resilience gained, the clarity found. It wasn't about thanking them for the abuse, but for the hard-won wisdom that emerged from it. Then came the decision about my sabbatical. Originally, it was just a trip. Now, It was a profound symbol of my liberation. I went ahead and booked my flights, secured accommodations, and finalized my itinerary for Southeast Asia. Each booking felt like a small victory, a defiant yes to myself in the face of their no. I envisioned myself on those ancient temples, in those bustling markets, thousands of miles away from the emotional, gravitational pull of my family. The thought filled me with a quiet joy, a sense of excited anticipation that I hadn't felt in years. I also began to prepare for the inevitable confrontation. I knew the letter from Mrs. Davies wouldn't be enough. There would be phone calls, dramatic visits, desperate pleas, and furious accusations. I mentally rehearsed my responses, focusing on calm, concise statements. I understand this is difficult to hear, but my decision is final. I love you, but I need to prioritize my financial well-being. My resources are no longer available for non-essential expenses. I knew I couldn't engage in their circular arguments, couldn't allow myself to be drawn back into the emotional quicksand. I made sure Clara was on standby. She offered to be a buffer, to check in on me, to remind me of my resolve when I felt myself waver. She even suggested a secret code word we could use if I needed an immediate exit from a family gathering, a subtle signal that meant rescue me now. Her friendship was a beacon in this turbulent time. The most profound shift during this period of preparation was internal. The constant nagging feeling of being less than, of being weak, began to dissipate. I started to see myself through Clara's and Dr. Evans's eyes as a woman who was brave enough to face deeply entrenched family dynamics, resilient enough to break free, and strong enough to stand alone. My financial prowess, once a tool for my family's exploitation, was now a tool for my liberation. My analytical mind, once used to justify their unreasonable demands, was now used to strategize my escape. I even started to reframe the word weak. They called me weak for not blindly submitting to their will. But the real weakness, I realized, was their inability to respect boundaries, their dependence on my resources, their emotional fragility that manifested as control. My weakness was their fear, their insecurity, their profound inability to stand on their own 2 feet without leaning on me. And that understanding, that complete reversal of the narrative, filled me with a quiet, steely power. I wasn't entering the next phase of this battle with fear, but with a deep, calm certainty. I had done my homework, I had built my defenses, I had found my strength, and I was ready for them to face the consequences. The air in my parents' dining room that Thanksgiving felt heavier than usual, thick with unspoken resentment and a palpable sense of anticipation. It wasn't the usual comfortable hum of family chatter. It was the tense quiet before a storm. I had sent the lawyer's letter 2 weeks prior, a formal, polite, but unmistakably firm declaration of my financial independence. The silence that followed had been unnerving. No furious phone calls, no accusatory texts, just silence. It was the calm before the storm, and I knew this dinner would be the reckoning. I had arrived early, steeling myself. My mother, usually bustling around the kitchen, was unusually subdued, her movements stiff. My father sat in his armchair, feigning interest in a newspaper, but his eyes darted towards me every few minutes. Michael and Emily arrived together, their usual boisterous energy replaced by a strained cheerfulness that didn't quite reach their eyes. They greeted me with an almost exaggerated warmth, a clear attempt to lull me into a false sense of security. I saw through it immediately. Dinner began, a painfully slow affair. The conversation revolved around trivialities, the weather, a neighbor's new car, the latest reality TV show. Each topic felt like a carefully placed landmine, designed to avoid the elephant in the room. I ate slowly, methodically, my senses heightened, acutely aware of every glance, every pause. My heart hammered against my ribs, but beneath the fear, there was a core of icy resolve. This was it. This was where I would stand my ground. Then, my mother cleared her throat, a sound that always signaled the beginning of a family discussion. She looked at me, her gaze soft, almost pleading. "Sarah, darling," she began, her voice sugary sweet. "We need to talk about this letter you sent. Your father and I were quite hurt. We don't understand why you've suddenly decided to cut us off, after all we've done for you. Michael jumped in, his tone sharp, cutting. Yeah, Sarah, what exactly is going on? 50,000 was a small request. Are you really going to abandon us? Your own family? Over a few dollars, it's pretty cold, if you ask me. Emily, predictably, started to tear up. I thought we were a family, Sarah. My art collective. It's a dream, and you're just going to let it die. How could you be so mean? The barrage began, a familiar symphony of guilt, accusation, and emotional manipulation. They were trying to pull me back into the old script, where I was the villain for setting boundaries, the heartless one for protecting myself. For years, I would have crumbled. I would have stammered apologies, offered compromises, and ultimately caved. But not this time. I took a deep breath, focusing on the calm certainty I'd cultivated in therapy. I looked at each of them in turn, my gaze steady, unwavering. I understand you're upset, I began, my voice calm, clear, and surprisingly strong. But the letter states my position clearly. I am no longer able to provide financial support beyond what I deem absolutely necessary for genuine emergencies, which will be assessed on a case-by-case basis. My focus now is on my own financial future and well-being, specifically my retirement and my planned sabbatical. My mother gasped, a dramatic hand flying to her chest. Sabbatical, Sarah? How can you even think of a vacation when your own parents are struggling? We need that kitchen renovation. It's an investment in the house, a family asset. The house is paid off, Mom, I stated, the factual tone deliberately devoid of emotion. And the roof repair was always the priority, not a new kitchen. As for your struggles, you have a comfortable pension and substantial savings. My financial assistance was never intended to be a permanent subsidy for non-essential expenses. Michael slammed his hand on the table, making the cutlery jump. Non-essential. My business venture is non-essential. This isn't about the kitchen, Sarah. This is about respect, about family. Are you seriously telling us you're going to let your own brother fail? Michael, I responded, meeting his angry gaze directly. Your business ventures are your responsibility. I am not an investor. And I am certainly not a guaranteed source of capital for speculative projects. I'm an independent adult. And my decisions about my money are my own, just as your decisions about your money are yours. Emily burst into theatrical sobs. You don't care. You never cared about my art. You just want to keep everything for yourself. Emily, I said, my voice softer, but no less firm. I've always supported your artistic endeavors within reason, but funding an entire art collective and wellness retreat is a substantial business venture, not a hobby. There are grants, investors, and crowdfunding options available for projects like yours. My role is not to be your sole financial backer. My mother's face hardened. Her voice dropped, becoming icily cold. You know, Sarah, we always thought you were the weak one, always so sensitive, so easily hurt, always letting others walk all over you. But it seems we were wrong. You're not weak. You're just selfish, ungrateful, after everything we gave you. This is how you repay us by abandoning us. The word weak hung in the air, a ghost from my past, but this time, it had no power over me. I felt a surge of adrenaline, not of fear, but of empowerment. This was the moment. This was where I reclaimed my narrative. You're right, Mom, I said, my voice rising slightly, clear and resonant. You always called me weak. You said I was too sensitive, too emotional, too focused on myself. You told me I needed to be stronger, but what you meant was I needed to be more pliable, more obedient to your demands. You labeled my desire for independence as selfishness, and my attempts to set boundaries as abandonment. I paused, letting my words sink in. Their faces were a mixture of shock and anger. They weren't used to me speaking this way, not openly, not directly, not challenging their ingrained narrative. But here's the truth, I continued, my gaze sweeping across each of them. I was never weak. I was conditioned. I was taught that my worth was tied to how much I gave to you, how much I sacrificed for your needs. I was gaslit into believing that my own desires were frivolous, that my financial success was a communal resource, and that setting boundaries was a betrayal. My mother's jaw dropped. Michael looked as if he'd been slapped. Emily's sobs hitched, her eyes wide with surprise. The money I gave you was never a loan that you intended to repay. I pressed on, my voice gaining momentum. It was an expectation, a demand. And when I tried to say no, or even question it, I was met with guilt trips, accusations, and the constant reminder that I was weak for not conforming to your expectations. I am not weak for wanting to live my own life, I declared, my voice now vibrating with conviction. I am not weak for prioritizing my own financial stability and mental well-being. I am not weak for choosing to take the sabbatical I've worked tirelessly for, a sabbatical you dismissed as excessive while demanding thousands for a kitchen renovation you don't need. I stood up slowly, pushing my chair back. The scrape of the wood against the floor echoed in the stunned silence. My entire body hummed with a newfound energy, a sense of absolute clarity and purpose. You called me weak for standing up for myself, I repeated, my voice strong, commanding the room. But the truth is, it takes immense strength to break free from decades of emotional manipulation. It takes strength to confront the people who are supposed to love you unconditionally, but who have consistently exploited you. It takes strength to say no when every fiber of your being has been trained to say yes. My mother finally found her voice, a high-pitched, furious shriek. How dare you, you ungrateful child? Get out of my house, you are no daughter of mine. Fine, I said, my voice calm despite the raw emotion churning inside me. If setting healthy boundaries makes me no daughter of yours, then so be it. But understand this, the consequences of my strength are that you will now have to face your own financial realities. My resources are no longer available to prop up your lifestyle, Michael's ventures, or Emily's dreams. You will have to find your own solutions, just as I have had to find mine. I looked at Michael, whose face was a mask of disbelief and anger. You always thought you were so much smarter, so much stronger than me, but you relied on my money, on my stability, to fund your illusions of grandeur. Now, you'll have to prove your own strength, without my safety net. Then I turned to Emily, who was now openly weeping. But her tears no longer moved me. Emily, your art is wonderful, but financial independence is part of adulthood. The world owes you nothing, and neither do I, if you want your dream. You'll have to build it yourself. Finally, I looked at my parents, their faces a mixture of fury and bewildered hurt. I love you, I said, and the words felt true, but they were no longer a plea for acceptance. They were a statement of fact, detached from obligation. But my love for you does not equate to endless financial sacrifice or emotional subservience. My boundaries are firm, and they are permanent. I walked to the door, my movements deliberate, unhurried. As I reached for the doorknob, my mother screamed after me, "You'll regret this. Sarah, you'll be all alone. You'll see how weak you truly are without us." I paused, my hand on the cold metal. I turned back, a small, knowing smile playing on my lips. "No, Mom," I said, my voice soft but utterly resolute. "I won't be alone. I'll be free. And for the first time in my life, I'll be truly strong. The consequences of my strength are just beginning, and they are yours to bear." Then, I opened the door, stepped out into the crisp autumn air, and closed it behind me, leaving the stunned silence and their fading accusations in my wake. The roar in my ears wasn't their anger anymore. It was the sound of my own liberation. The silence that followed my exit from my parents' house was not peaceful. It was a ringing, echoing void, filled with the reverberations of unspoken words, shattered expectations, and the raw, electric hum of defiance. My hands were still trembling as I drove away, but it wasn't from fear. It was from the sheer adrenaline of having finally, irrevocably, spoken my truth. The dam had broken, and now, I had to brace for the flood. The initial aftermath was precisely as Dr. Evans and I had anticipated, a volatile mixture of fury, bewildered hurt, and calculated silence. For the first few days, there was nothing, no calls, no texts, no emails. It was unnerving, almost more so than the screaming. This was their classic tactic, the silent treatment, designed to make me doubt myself, to crumble under the weight of imagined abandonment, to come crawling back begging for forgiveness. But I had prepared for this. I leaned heavily on my support system. Clara called me every day, cheering me on, reminding me of my strength. "They're trying to freeze you out, Sarah," she'd say. "Don't fall for it. You did the right thing. Stay strong." Dr. Evans helped me process the lingering guilt, the primal fear of familial rejection that still gnawed at me. "Remember," she'd reiterate, "this is their way of trying to regain control. Your job is to stay firm, to show them that their old tactics no longer work." Then, the storm broke. It started with my mother, a series of increasingly frantic, then accusatory voicemails. "Sarah, how could you do this to your own mother? We're heartbroken. Your father is beside himself. Are you truly going to let us suffer?" The tone shifted quickly from feigned sorrow to outright anger. "You think you're so smart, don't you? So independent, you'll see. You'll be all alone. No one wants a cold, unfeeling daughter like you." I listened to them, but I didn't respond. I wrote down the key phrases in my journal, labeling them guilt trip, gaslighting, threat of abandonment. It was a powerful exercise, detaching the emotion from the words, seeing them for what they were: desperate attempts at manipulation. Michael was next. His approach was more insidious, a blend of anger and wounded male pride. He sent me long, rambling emails, accusing me of destroying the family, of ruining his prospects, and of being jealous of his ambition. He even tried to play the victim, reminiscing about childhood memories, implying I was betraying a sacred bond. "Remember all those times I protected you, Sarah. How could you turn your back on me now?" I didn't respond to his emails. I simply marked them as read and filed them away. Emily, predictably, resorted to public shaming. She posted vague but emotionally charged messages on social media, clearly aimed at me. Heartbroken when those closest to you betray your dreams. Feeling abandoned by those you thought would always support you. Our extended family, who mostly existed on the fringes of our drama, started sending me hesitant, probing messages. "Is everything okay, Sarah? Heard you had a disagreement with your mom." I responded politely but vaguely. Family matters, just working through some things. Refusing to engage in gossip or justify my actions. This was my story, and I wasn't going to let them control the narrative anymore. The most difficult part was internal. Despite all the preparation, the deep-seated need for my family's approval, ingrained over decades, still screamed at me, what if they're right? What if I'm selfish? What if I'm alone? There were moments of profound sadness, moments when I grieved the family I wished I had. The idealized version of unconditional love that had never truly existed. I had to consciously, deliberately, remind myself of every manipulative incident, every disrespectful comment, every financial drain. I reread my journal entries, the concrete proof of their behavior. One day, my mother actually showed up at my apartment unannounced. My heart leaped into my throat when I saw her through the peephole. This was unprecedented. She never visited without a formal invitation, usually for a carefully orchestrated event. She looked disheveled, her eyes red, her makeup smudged. She started banging on the door, calling my name, her voice rising in pitch. "Sarah, open this door. We need to talk. You can't just cut us off like this." This was a test, a crucial test of my new boundaries. My therapist had prepared me for this exact scenario. Do not engage. Do not open the door. Your home is your sanctuary. I stood silently, my hand pressed against the cool wood of the door, listening to her pleas turn to angry demands, then to tearful accusations. It took every ounce of my willpower not to open it, not to try and soothe her, not to fall back into the old pattern. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 10 minutes, I heard her storm away, muttering curses under her breath. The silence that followed her departure was different. It wasn't the void of uncertainty, but the peace of a battle won. My hands were still trembling, but this time, it was from the sheer strength of my resolve. I had held my boundary. I had protected my space, and the sky hadn't fallen. The full consequences of my strength began to unfold in their lives. Without my financial backing, Michael's investment opportunity evaporated. I heard through the grapevine, a cousin who was still friendly with me, that he'd tried to get money from other relatives. But they were more cautious, or perhaps simply didn't have my seemingly endless supply. He was forced to scale back his lavish lifestyle. driving an older car and canceling his expensive golf club membership. For him, a man who measured success by outward appearance. This was a profound blow to his ego. He continued to send me bitter, sarcastic texts about my sudden frugality. But they had no sting. Emily's art collective dreams crashed and burned. Without my upfront capital, she couldn't secure the trendy space she wanted. She tried crowdfunding, but her pitch lacked substance, without a clear business plan, which I had refused to help her with beyond general advice. Her posts on social media became increasingly frustrated, then despairing. Eventually, she retreated, blaming the economy and lack of support for true artists. I felt a pang of something akin to sadness for her, but it was quickly overshadowed by the reminder that this was her journey, not mine to fund. Perhaps this would force her to develop the resilience she truly needed. And my parents, my parents, without my constant infusions of cash, they suddenly had to confront their own spending habits. The kitchen renovation was indefinitely postponed. My mother started complaining to relatives about how tight things were and how Sarah has abandoned us in our old age. But now, their complaints held less weight. Some relatives knew or suspected the extent of my previous financial support. Others had their own struggles and weren't about to offer handouts. My parents were forced to live within their actual means, a concept they had skillfully avoided for decades, thanks to my generosity. This newfound financial hardship also forced a shift in their dynamic. My mother, who had always relied on me to manage the money she deemed too complicated, now had to learn to budget herself. My father, who had been content to let her lead the financial charge and let me pay for everything else, had to become more engaged. I heard about petty arguments over grocery bills, disagreements about whether they could afford a new garden hose. It wasn't pretty, but it was, finally, their responsibility. My own life, in contrast, began to flourish in the newfound space and freedom. The constant anxiety that had been a shadow over my existence started to lift. My sleep improved, my appetite returned, my focus at work sharpened, and I found myself approaching new projects with renewed vigor and creativity. The greatest change was the quiet, undeniable shift in my self-perception. I was no longer the weak girl trying to earn her family's love. I was Sarah, the woman who had faced her abusers, broken free from decades of conditioning, and reclaimed her own life. The emotional energy I had spent on worrying about their needs, their opinions, and their judgments was now channeled into building my own happiness. I started reconnecting with old friends I had neglected. Too ashamed or too exhausted to maintain those relationships, I pursued new hobbies, joining a book club and taking a photography class. My apartment, once a retreat from my family, became a vibrant, joyful space that reflected my personality, not just a place to hide. The relationship with my family remained strained, even hostile, for a long time. There was no grand apology, no sudden moment of reconciliation. That's a fantasy often seen in movies, not in real life when dealing with deep-seated dysfunctional patterns. They continued their passive-aggressive jabs, their subtle attempts to make me feel guilty, but their words bounced off me like pebbles against a fortress wall. I had built that wall brick by painful brick, and it was impenetrable. I learned to live with the reality that my relationship with my immediate family might never be what I had once desperately wished for. And that was okay, because the peace I had found, the strength I had cultivated, the authenticity I now embodied, these were far more valuable than any fleeting, conditional approval they might have offered. The consequences of my strength weren't just about their financial discomfort. They were about the uncomfortable truth they were forced to confront. They had relied on my weakness, on my compliance, for too long, and now, my strength meant they had to finally stand on their own. And that, in itself, was a powerful vindication. My sabbatical to Southeast Asia was nothing short of transformative. It wasn't just a trip, it was an odyssey, a physical manifestation of the emotional liberation I had fought so hard for. Stepping off that plane in Bangkok, feeling the humid air and hearing the vibrant cacophony of a city utterly different from anything I'd known. I felt a lightness I hadn't realized was missing for decades. It was the feeling of carrying only my own baggage, not the emotional and financial burdens of my family. The ancient temples of Cambodia, the bustling markets of Vietnam, the serene beaches of Thailand. Each experience was a brushstroke on the canvas of my new life. I hiked through emerald rice paddies, learned to cook exotic dishes from street vendors, and sat in quiet contemplation amidst crumbling ruins, feeling centuries of history wash over me in those moments, thousands of miles away from the constant hum of family drama. The lingering whispers of weak and selfish finally faded into the background, replaced by the quiet hum of my own intuition, my own strength. There was a particularly profound moment in Angkor Wat, as I watched the sun rise over the ancient stone, casting long, dramatic shadows across the intricate carvings. I felt an overwhelming sense of peace. It was a realization that my life was vast, beautiful, and full of possibilities, far beyond the narrow confines my family had tried to impose. I wasn't defined by their labels, their expectations, or their need for control. I was defined by my resilience, my courage, and my capacity for self-love. I wept then, not tears of sadness, but of pure, unadulterated joy and gratitude for the journey that had brought me to this exact moment. When I returned home, almost 3 months later, I was a different woman. The physical transformation was subtle, a healthier glow, a more relaxed demeanor, perhaps a few pounds lighter, but the internal shift was seismic. I walked taller, spoke with greater clarity, and carried myself with an undeniable sense of quiet power. The anxiety that had once been my constant companion was gone, replaced by a deep well of serenity. My apartment, which had once felt like a bunker, now truly felt like a home, a sanctuary. I had decluttered before I left, metaphorically and literally, and returning to a clean, minimalist space felt incredibly refreshing. I rearranged furniture, added vibrant textiles and artwork from my travels, creating a living space that reflected my renewed spirit. The initial days back involved a predictable flurry of attempts from my family to re-engage, mostly through passive-aggressive means. My mother called, feigning concern. "Sarah, are you well? You look different, a bit gaunt. Perhaps that trip clearly didn't do you much good." Michael sent a text. "Heard you're back. Hope you didn't blow all your money on meaningless trinkets. Unlike some of us who actually have real responsibilities." Emily posted a picture on social media of herself looking mournful, with a caption about the pain of unfulfilled dreams. I no longer reacted. I applied the lessons from therapy, the tools I had diligently practiced. My responses were brief, factual, and emotionally neutral. "I'm doing great. Thanks for asking. Mom, the trip was wonderful. Glad you're focused on your responsibilities. Michael." I didn't engage in their baiting, didn't offer explanations, didn't seek their approval or understanding. Their words had lost their power because I had stopped giving them an audience in my mind. The biggest consequence for my family unfolded slowly, subtly, like a slow-motion car crash. Without my constant financial infusions, they had to confront the reality of their own finances. My parents, who had lived beyond their means for years, were now forced to make difficult choices. The emergency repairs they had always demanded suddenly became manageable DIY projects. The necessary luxuries were quietly phased out. My mother even started taking on small freelance accounting jobs, something she hadn't done in decades, to supplement their income. It was painful to watch, but it was also, in a strange way, a step towards their own accountability. Michael, without my money to fuel his ventures, had to rely solely on his law firm's salary. He became noticeably more stressed, less outwardly confident. His attempts to invest in risky schemes ceased, replaced by a more disciplined approach to saving. He grumbled about it constantly, but the change was evident. He was still the golden child in my parents' eyes, but his reliance on me had been exposed, and that, for him, was a bitter pill to swallow. Emily's journey was perhaps the most poignant. Her art collective dream truly died, and she initially spiraled into a deep depression, blaming everyone but herself. However, a few months after my return, I received an unexpected email from her. It was brief, almost hesitant. She had started teaching small art classes at a local community center. The income was modest, but it was hers, earned through her own effort. "It's not the big collective," she wrote, "but at least it's my income, and no one's telling me what to do with it." It wasn't an apology, but it was an acknowledgement, a tiny spark of self-sufficiency. I replied with a simple, encouraging message, offering no financial help, but genuine support for her new endeavor. It was a small opening, a sign that perhaps, one day, a healthier relationship might be possible. But that was for the future, not for me to force or fund. For me, the greatest consequence of my strength was the profound peace and self-sovereignty I gained. My relationships outside my immediate family flourished. Clara and I grew even closer, our bond forged in the fires of my transformation. I started dating again, and for the first time, I felt truly ready for a healthy partnership. One built on mutual respect and genuine connection, not on codependency or a desperate need for validation. I found joy in simple things: a quiet evening with a good book, a spontaneous weekend trip, spending time with friends who truly saw and appreciated me for who I was. I also discovered a new purpose in my professional life. My experiences had given me a unique perspective on financial health, not just in terms of numbers, but in the deeper, emotional aspects of money and boundaries. I started incorporating this into my client consultations, subtly guiding them towards understanding their own financial narratives and the emotional attachments they had to their money. It felt incredibly fulfilling to help others avoid the pitfalls I had suffered. Looking back, the label weak was the greatest gift my family ever gave me, because it forced me to confront that very notion, to dig deep, and to discover an undeniable, fierce strength I never knew I possessed. It wasn't a strength born of aggression or dominance, but a quiet, unwavering strength born of self-respect, self-protection, and fierce self-love. It was the strength to say no when everything in me had been programmed to say yes. It was the strength to walk away from toxic dynamics, even when it meant walking away from the familiar. The journey wasn't easy. It was filled with pain, guilt, and moments of profound loneliness, but every single step, every boundary set, every tear shed, led me closer to the empowered, authentic woman I am today. I learned that true strength isn't about never falling. It's about getting back up, dusting yourself off, and building your own damn fortress. And to anyone watching or reading this, if you've ever been called weak for trying to protect your peace, for trying to live your own life, know this: that label is not a reflection of you. It's a reflection of the other person's fear of losing control over you, your desire for autonomy, for boundaries, for self-respect. That is your superpower. Embrace it, cultivate it, because when you do, you will not only reclaim your narrative, but you will also show them, and yourself, the true, magnificent consequences of your strength. If my story resonated with you, please hit that like button, subscribe to my channel, and share this with anyone who needs to hear it. And I'd love to hear your own experiences in the comments below. Have you ever had to stand up for yourself against difficult family dynamics? How did you find your strength? Let's build a community of empowered individuals, supporting each other on our journeys to freedom.